The first thing I noticed was the second pair of men's shoes beside my front door, one pair of polished brown loafers, and one pair of black running shoes, both sitting on the hardwood floor beneath the framed wedding photograph my wife had insisted we hang there. I stood with my tool bag still hooked over my shoulder, staring at them while laughter drifted down from the second floor. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 40 years old, and I had spent nearly 18 years working as a licensed electrician around Richmond, Virginia. I knew those shoes. The brown loafers belonged to Trevor Hale, a commercial real estate broker who lived 3 streets over and had attended our 4th of July cookout that summer. The black shoes belonged to Caleb Ross, the owner of the fitness studio where my wife had started taking private evening classes. Neither man's car was parked out front, but when I glanced through the narrow window beside the door, I could see the rear corner of Trevor's silver Mercedes tucked behind our detached garage, deliberately hidden from the street. I had come home almost 3 hours early because a renovation project near Shockoe Bottom had been shut down after a water pipe burst inside the building. My wife, Lindsay, thought I would be working until at least 6. The laughter upstairs stopped, and a moment later I heard Caleb's voice say something too quiet for me to understand. Then Lindsay answered him in a breathless tone I had not heard directed at me in months. I wish I could tell you I immediately understood what was happening, but the mind protects itself in strange ways. I told myself Trevor and Caleb might be helping her move furniture. I told myself there could be a perfectly ordinary explanation for 2 men hiding their cars and removing their shoes in my house on a Wednesday afternoon. Then a piece of Lindsay's black dress landed on the upstairs hallway floor, sliding into view through the banister. Now, I want you to imagine standing inside the home you paid for, surrounded by the photographs and furniture of a 12-year marriage, while your brain desperately invents lies because the truth is too humiliating to accept. I put my tool bag down without making a sound and climbed the stairs. Every step felt strangely separate from the next, as though I were watching someone else's boots move over the wood. The bedroom door was partly open. I reached it, looked through the gap, and saw my wife in our bed with both men. I will not describe the physical details because they are not what stayed with me. What stayed with me was the framed photograph on Lindsay's nightstand, the one taken on our 10th anniversary beside the James River, shaking slightly each time the headboard struck the wall. What stayed with me was Trevor reaching toward the glass of bourbon he had placed on my bedside table. What stayed with me most was Lindsay laughing when Caleb whispered, "Your husband really has no idea, does he?" She answered, "Ethan only sees what I let him see." My chest tightened so violently that for several seconds I thought I was having a heart attack. My fingers went numb. Saliva flooded my mouth, and I had to swallow repeatedly to keep from vomiting onto the carpet. There were 3 adults inside that room, yet I felt like the only person who had somehow ceased to exist. Trevor turned his head toward the door. I stepped back before he saw me, pulled out my phone, and quietly started recording. I raised it just high enough to capture the open doorway, their faces, their voices, and the unmistakable setting. I recorded for 47 seconds. It was the longest 47 seconds of my life. Every instinct I possessed demanded that I kick the door open, drag both men into the hallway, and make all 3 of them feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. My hands were strong from 2 decades of pulling cable and bending conduit. There was a 20-ounce framing hammer in my tool bag downstairs. That thought frightened me enough to restore my judgment. I backed away, descended the stairs, picked up my bag, and walked out through the garage. None of them knew I had been there. That choice saved my future. If you have ever been betrayed, you already know that anger arrives offering immediate relief, but it sends the bill later. Mine offered me 40 seconds of satisfaction in exchange for my freedom, my career, and every advantage I still had. I refused the deal. I drove to a gravel turnout near Belle Isle, shut off my truck, and sat behind the wheel with the air conditioning running. My entire body trembled. I watched the recording once, hoping I had somehow misunderstood it, then locked my phone and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. Lindsay and I had been married for 12 years. We did not have children, partly because she kept saying the timing was never right, and partly because I had believed we had all the time in the world. I had renovated most of our brick house myself. I had rewired every room, restored the old porch lights, and installed the walnut shelving Lindsay showed off whenever friends visited. I suddenly understood that I had spent years building a stage on which she had been performing a life she no longer respected. The clues had been there. During the previous 4 months, Lindsay had started leaving the dining table to answer calls in the laundry room, claiming the kitchen was too noisy even when the dishwasher was not running. She had purchased expensive dresses she called confidence investments, though she rarely wore them when we went anywhere together. She had also become irritated by harmless questions. When I once asked why a fitness class ended at 9, but she returned after midnight, she stared at me and said, "Do you hear how controlling you sound?" I apologized. That memory hurt almost as much as what I had seen, because I realized she had trained me to doubt my own reasonable instincts. At 5:20 that afternoon, Lindsay texted me, "Long day? I'm making salmon tonight. Love you." I looked at those words until they blurred. Then I replied, "Yeah, rough job. Should be home around 6:30. Love you too." Writing that final sentence felt like pushing a needle beneath my own fingernail, but I needed her relaxed. Before leaving Belle Isle, I uploaded the recording to 2 encrypted cloud folders, emailed a copy to an account Lindsay did not know existed, and called my old friend Marcus Bell. Marcus had gone through a bitter divorce 5 years earlier and had once made me promise that if I ever suspected anything, I would speak to a lawyer before speaking to my wife. I said, "I need the name of your divorce attorney." He went silent, then asked, "What happened?" I answered, "I came home early." He did not make me explain. By 6:30, I was sitting at our dining table while Lindsay served salmon with lemon butter and talked about a fictional afternoon spent answering emails for the nonprofit where she worked as a development coordinator. Her damp hair was tied behind her head. She had changed the bedding. She had even lit a citrus candle in the hallway, probably to cover the mixture of cologne upstairs. "You're quiet," she said, touching my wrist. "Did something happen at the job?" I looked into the face of the woman I had once trusted more than anyone alive and said, "A pipe burst." The whole schedule fell apart. Technically, neither statement was a lie. She smiled sympathetically and squeezed my hand. "You worked too hard." That nearly broke the mask. I lowered my eyes to the plate so she would not see the fury in them. Over dinner, she checked her smartwatch 4 times. Each time, a tiny smile appeared before she dismissed the notification. I asked whether her training session with Caleb was still scheduled for Friday. She did not hesitate. "Probably. He's such a drill sergeant, but the workouts are worth it." Then she laughed, the same laugh I had heard from the bedroom. Let me pause here, because this was when grief turned into strategy. Until that dinner, part of me still wanted one honest sentence from her, some involuntary crack in the performance that would prove the woman I married was not entirely gone. Instead, she sat beneath the pendant light I had installed and lied smoothly enough to make deception look like breathing. I stopped waiting for honesty after that. The next morning, I met attorney Denise Holloway in a quiet office overlooking East Main Street. I showed her the recording, explained that the house had been mine before the marriage but had been refinanced jointly, and handed her copies of our recent bank statements. Denise watched only 12 seconds before pausing the video. "Do not send this anywhere yet," she said. "Virginia recognizes fault-based divorce, and adultery can matter, particularly for spousal support, but you need evidence gathered lawfully and a complete financial picture. More importantly, you need to behave as if a judge will eventually read every message you send." She recommended a licensed private investigator named Owen Price and told me not to move money, threaten anyone, or post anything publicly. "Your calm is an asset," she said. "Protect it." I left her office with a folder beneath my arm and the first solid ground I had felt since opening that bedroom door. Owen began working 2 days later. I gave him Trevor's and Caleb's names, photographs, vehicle descriptions, and the dates Lindsay claimed to attend evening events. I expected him to confirm that both men were sleeping with my wife. What I did not expect was how many other women were tangled in their lives. Trevor was married to a woman named Nora and had 2 daughters. Caleb publicly presented himself as single, but he had lived with his girlfriend, Jasmine Reed, for almost 4 years. Within 10 days, Owen photographed Trevor entering a hotel near Short Pump with a woman who was not Lindsay or Nora. 3 nights later, Caleb left his studio with another married client. The men were not only betraying their partners with Lindsay. They appeared to be running overlapping affairs, sometimes introducing women to each other under the cover of private social events. Owen found group reservations, hotel receipts, and photographs going back months. Lindsay had not stumbled into a single reckless encounter. She had entered a system. At home, I became the husband she expected. I made coffee in the morning, asked about her work, and slept beside her without touching her. When she asked why I seemed distant, I blamed exhaustion. Meanwhile, I created a timeline on a legal pad I kept inside a locked compartment in my work van. Red ink marked every confirmed meeting. Blue ink marked the lies Lindsay told to cover them. Green ink marked other potential victims. By the end of the second week, the page looked like a circuit diagram designed by a madman. Trevor's wife, Nora, occupied the center of it. She was 38, worked as a communications director for a regional hospital network, and had unknowingly paid for several of Trevor's hotel stays through a shared business credit card. Denise warned me not to contact her until Owen had finished documenting everything. I followed her advice, though waiting became its own form of torture. Lindsay, convinced that I remained blind, started taking greater risks. One Saturday, she told me she was attending a fundraising breakfast, then drove to Trevor's rental property near Forest Hill. Owen photographed Caleb arriving 20 minutes later. That evening, she came home carrying a box of pastries as proof of the event she had never attended. "I saved you the maple one," she said. I thanked her, placed it on a plate, and watched syrup collect beneath it like amber. That pastry became the strange little symbol of the entire marriage for me. Carefully packaged sweetness brought home to disguise where she had really been. 3 weeks after the discovery, Denise gave me permission to approach Nora privately. We met at a coffee shop in Carytown during her lunch break. She arrived wearing a navy blazer and an expression of polite impatience, probably assuming I wanted to discuss electrical work for the hospital. I slid a sealed envelope across the table and said, "Before you open this, I need you to know I'm not asking you for money, and I'm not trying to embarrass you. Our spouses have been lying to both of us." Her face changed before she touched the envelope. Some people recognize the truth the moment another person finally gives it a name. Inside were still photographs, hotel dates, and a brief written timeline. I did not show her the bedroom video in public. Nora read the first page twice. Her hands remained perfectly still, but all the color drained from her cheeks. "How long?" she asked. "I can prove at least 7 months involving Lindsay," I said. "The investigator believes there were others before her." Nora stared through the window toward Carey Street. After a long silence, she said, "Trevor told me you were unstable." That caught me off guard. "He talked about me?" She nodded. "He said Lindsay was frightened of you, that you monitored her, that your marriage was practically over. He made it sound like he was helping her escape." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. Lindsay had not only cheated in my house, she and Trevor had apparently written a false version of me to justify themselves. Nora then revealed something that widened the entire situation. Trevor had encouraged her to recommend Caleb's studio to women at the hospital, promising discounted private training packages. At least 6 employees had signed up. 2 had later transferred departments after uncomfortable personal encounters with Caleb, but no formal complaint had been filed. "If they used my name to reach those women," Nora whispered. The sentence died in her throat. I told her we would not act recklessly. We would identify everyone, verify what happened, and give each person evidence privately instead of turning their pain into entertainment. Nora looked at me for a long moment and asked, "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't yet," I said. "Check everything. Speak to your own attorney. I'll give you Owen's license information and Denise's contact details. Trust the documents before you trust me." That answer seemed to matter. 2 days later, she called and said she wanted to help. This was where the slow seduction began, but not in the way Lindsay would later imagine it. Nora and I did not sleep together. We did not even kiss. We built something subtler and, to Trevor, far more dangerous. The appearance of emotional closeness, cultivated patiently enough to make him experience the uncertainty he had inflicted on us. With our attorney's approval, we began meeting in public places where Trevor's acquaintances were likely to notice: a Saturday farmer's market, a riverside charity planning meeting, a small restaurant in Churchill where one of his business partners ate regularly. We never behaved inappropriately. Nora would lean closer while I showed her documents. I would make her laugh just as someone familiar passed our table. Once, she placed her hand over mine for exactly 3 seconds when Trevor's junior associate entered the cafe. By Monday, Trevor was asking her why Ethan Walker's truck had been seen near Carytown. She answered calmly, "He's helping me with something. Nothing more." Lindsay noticed the shift too. She began asking strangely specific questions. "Have you run into Nora Hale lately?" she said one evening while folding towels. I kept my back toward her and answered, "Trevor's wife? I saw her downtown." The towel stopped moving in her hands. "Why?" "Electrical consultation," I said. "Her hospital network may need subcontractors." That was plausible enough to survive, but threatening enough to make her imagination work. From then on, Nora and I fed them no direct lies, only fragments they could not control. A photograph of 2 coffee cups on Nora's public social media page. My work van parked outside the hospital administrative building. A charcoal scarf Nora intentionally left on the passenger seat when Lindsay borrowed my truck to move a donation box. The scarf was not intimate evidence, but Lindsay picked it up as if it were contaminated. "Whose is this?" she demanded. I looked at it, shrugged, and said, "Nora's. She must have forgotten it after our meeting." "You're meeting her alone now?" Her voice sharpened. I let 3 seconds pass before replying. "Why does that bother you?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I caught her, I saw fear break through her confidence. The irony was almost unbearable. She could share our bed with 2 men, yet the idea that I might be sharing a conversation with another woman made her furious. I want you to sit with that contradiction for a moment. Betrayers often demand freedoms they would consider unforgivable if the roles were reversed. Lindsay did not fear losing my love yet. She feared losing control of the arrangement. And while she watched Nora and me, wondering whether we were slowly becoming something more, neither she nor Trevor realized we had already identified 11 other people who deserved to know the truth. The most important of them was Jasmine Reed, Caleb's girlfriend, and when she finally agreed to meet us, she brought a small black notebook that changed the scale of everything. Jasmine placed the notebook on the table between us and said, "Caleb calls this his client book, but clients don't need symbols beside their names." We were sitting in the back corner of a quiet restaurant near Virginia Commonwealth University, far enough from Caleb's studio that none of his regulars were likely to recognize her. Jasmine was 34, worked as a respiratory therapist, and looked like someone who had not slept properly in weeks. She had found the notebook inside a locked drawer after receiving the evidence Nora and I sent her through an attorney. Caleb used initials instead of full names, but Jasmine recognized several phone numbers and appointment times. Besides certain entries, he had drawn small shapes, circles, triangles, and black squares. She had assumed they described training programs until she compared the dates with his overnight absences. "The triangle beside L.W. is your wife," she told me. I checked his calendar. She wasn't listed as a client on the days they met at your house. My stomach tightened at the sight of Lindsay's initials, but the notebook contained something even worse. Trevor's initials appeared at the top of multiple pages, followed by addresses, hotel room numbers, and lists of women. Nora turned one page and stopped breathing for a second. Beside the initials N.H., Caleb had written referral source, keep unaware. Nora closed the book carefully, as though she might tear it apart if she moved too quickly. Trevor and Caleb had been using her hospital connections to find women, learning which ones were lonely, newly divorced, or having trouble at home, then inviting them into private sessions and social gatherings. Some relationships may have been consensual affairs. Others looked like calculated manipulation. There were notes beside women's initials such as needs attention, husband travels, and worried about job. One entry referred to a woman who reported directly to Nora. "They used what I told Trevor at home," she whispered. "I talked about my employees because I trusted my husband. He passed their private problems to Caleb." Jasmine's jaw tightened. Caleb always knew exactly what to say to people. I used to think he was emotionally intelligent. She gave a humorless laugh. He was collecting weaknesses. Let me pause here, because discovering an affair is one kind of pain. Discovering that your betrayal was merely one branch of something organized and predatory is another. Lindsay had chosen to participate, but several names in that notebook belonged to women who might have been pressured, deceived, or professionally exposed. Revenge could no longer mean uploading a scandal and watching strangers tear everyone apart. We had to separate the willing participants from the people who had also been used. We photographed every page and returned the notebook before Caleb noticed it was missing. Then Owen cross-referenced the initials with studio records Jasmine could lawfully access through shared household paperwork, public social media posts, hotel reservations, and Trevor's business calendar. Denise coordinated with Nora's attorney, while Jasmine retained her own. Nobody sent a single impulsive message. Nobody posted a photograph. We built individual evidence packets, each containing only the material relevant to its recipient. Trevor's other affair partners' spouses received dates and photographs. Caleb's girlfriend received his full, documented timeline. Women who might have experienced professional misconduct were directed toward independent legal counsel and the hospital's confidential reporting system. Trevor's business partners received proof only where company cards, rental properties, or employee referrals had been misused. The distinction mattered to me. I wanted the truth to travel everywhere it belonged, but nowhere it did not. At home, Lindsay's confidence continued to decay. She began appearing at my work sites without warning, bringing coffee I had not requested, and asking who I had spoken to that day. Once, she drove 40 minutes to a warehouse project in Ashland because I did not answer her call while standing inside an electrical room with no reception. She arrived in high heels and a pale blue office dress, smiling for the crew while her eyes searched every woman on the property. "I thought I'd surprise my husband," she said. My foreman, Luis, looked at me with raised eyebrows because Lindsay had never visited one of my jobs in 12 years. I thanked her for the coffee, kissed her cheek, and returned to the panel schedule. That evening, she asked whether Nora was attractive. I said, "I suppose so." "That isn't an answer." "Then why ask a question you've already answered for yourself?" I replied. She stared at me across the kitchen island. "I just think it's inappropriate for a married man to spend so much time with another man's wife." The hypocrisy was so pure that I almost admired it. I wiped a drop of water from the counter and said, "If Trevor has a problem, he can speak to me." Lindsay's face tightened. I could see 3 fears competing behind her eyes. That Nora knew, that Trevor suspected her panic, and that I might no longer be waiting obediently at home. The slow seduction was working because it existed primarily inside their imaginations. Nora began wearing a fragrance Trevor had never smelled before, not because it came from me, but because we knew he would assume it did. I recommended an old soul record during one of our evidence meetings, and she played it in her kitchen while Trevor was home. When he asked where she had heard it, she smiled and said, "Someone reminded me I used to like this kind of music." That sentence kept him awake until 2 in the morning. Meanwhile, Lindsay started initiating intimacy again, suddenly affectionate after months of coldness. I refused gently, blaming stress and long hours. Her frustration grew with every rejection. She bought concert tickets for a band we had loved when we first met and placed them beside my breakfast plate. "I thought we needed a night that feels like us," she said. I studied the tickets and remembered saving for months to take her to that same band during our second year together. Once, the gesture would have moved me. Now I saw it for what it was. Not love returning, but ownership feeling threatened. "I'm working late that night," I told her. "Since when?" "Since the hospital requested an emergency electrical assessment." I did not mention that Nora would be there. Lindsay shoved her chair back hard enough to scrape the floor. "You're always at that hospital now. It's a large contract. And Nora just happens to be involved in every part of it?" I looked directly at her. "Is there something you want to ask me?" For one suspended second, I thought she might confess. Her lips parted and her eyes filled with something that almost resembled shame. Then she chose aggression. "I want to know if my husband is cheating on me." I held her gaze and said, "That would be a terrible thing to do to someone." She flinched. It was small, but I saw it. She left the kitchen and slammed the bedroom door. I slept in the guest room, telling her I did not want to argue. In truth, I had not slept in our bed since the day I caught them. She simply had not noticed, because I waited until she fell asleep before moving downstairs and returned before her alarm rang. 2 mornings later, my younger sister, Rebecca, called while I was driving to a service job. Rebecca was 36 and lived outside Charlottesville with her husband and son. Lindsay had contacted her, claiming I was having an emotional affair with Nora and asking Rebecca to talk sense into me before I destroyed the marriage. I pulled into a hardware store parking lot and told my sister the truth. There was silence on the line, followed by a sharp inhale. "She did what?" Rebecca asked. I explained the discovery, the recording, the investigation, and the reason I had kept it quiet. I expected questions. Instead, she said, send me Denise's number so I know what I'm allowed to say. Then tell me how I can help. Rebecca and Lindsay had been close for years. Lindsay had stood beside her at the hospital when my nephew was born, organized her baby shower, and spent Christmas mornings in her kitchen. I had worried Rebecca might pressure me to reconcile for the sake of family harmony. She did the opposite. You're my brother, she said. And even if you weren't, nobody deserves to be manipulated like that. The next time Lindsay called her, Rebecca calmly played along. She said my behavior sounded concerning and invited Lindsay to drive to Charlottesville the following weekend to talk privately. That gave Owen a predictable 4-hour window to document Trevor and Caleb, who had already planned to meet at our house again. It also allowed Denise to arrange for a forensic accountant to copy the financial records stored on our shared home computer while I still had lawful access. Lindsay accepted the invitation, but Trevor changed the meeting at the last minute after Nora mentioned that she might spend Saturday with a friend from Richmond. His jealousy had started disrupting their own plans. That was our first sign the alliance between the three of them was cracking. Caleb blamed Trevor for becoming careless. Trevor accused Lindsay of failing to control me. Lindsay sent Caleb a message saying, Ethan was never supposed to wake up. He was supposed to keep working and paying bills while we figured out what we wanted. Owen obtained that message through Jasmine, who saw it appear on Caleb's synchronized tablet. Reading it was strangely clarifying. Lindsay had not planned to leave immediately. She wanted me functional, trusting, and financially dependable while she explored whatever life Trevor and Caleb offered her. I was not a husband in her plan. I was infrastructure. Rebecca became the first person in my family to see the full recording. She watched it in Denise's conference room, covered her mouth, and asked Denise to stop after 15 seconds. Then she turned toward me and said, You don't owe her one more private chance. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed firm. Whatever happens when this comes out, you are not the person who broke this family. Those words reached somewhere the lawyers and evidence could not. Until then, part of me had carried an irrational embarrassment, as if being deceived meant I had been weak. Rebecca stripped that shame away. She reminded me that trusting my wife had not been stupidity. Abusing that trust had been Lindsay's choice. If you have ever blamed yourself for failing to predict another person's cruelty, listen carefully. Hindsight can make every missed clue look obvious, but love is not supposed to be an investigation. The shame belongs to the person who weaponized your trust, not to you for offering it. The mass exposure began on a Tuesday at 9 o'clock in the morning. Denise and the other attorneys had chosen the timing so the relevant people could receive their packets privately, contact counsel, and preserve records before Trevor or Caleb started deleting evidence. At 9:02, Nora handed Trevor divorce papers in the lobby of his own brokerage firm. At 9:05, Jasmine's attorney sent Caleb a preservation notice covering his devices, client communications, and financial accounts. At 9:07, 3 spouses received documented proof of hotel meetings involving Trevor. At 9:10, 2 women contacted the hospital's compliance office regarding Caleb's use of information Trevor had obtained through Nora. At 9:15, Trevor's partners learned that company properties and cards had allegedly supported his affairs. At 9:18, Caleb's studio landlord received notice of potential unauthorized commercial activity and possible violations connected to private after-hours events. Every message was factual. Every attachment had been reviewed. There were no insults, threats, or edited clips. The evidence spoke in a voice louder than rage ever could. I was standing inside an unfinished apartment building near Manchester when Lindsay called me at 9:23. I watched her name flash across my phone and let it ring twice before answering. Ethan, she said, breathing hard. Something is happening. Behind her voice, I could hear office doors opening and people speaking rapidly. What do you mean? I asked. Trevor says Nora filed for divorce. Caleb says Jasmine took everything from their apartment. They both think someone sent evidence. I stepped away from my crew and entered an empty room overlooking the river. Evidence of what? She went silent. You know what? She finally whispered. No, I said. I want to hear you say it. Her breathing became ragged. Can you come home? I'm working. Please, Ethan. This is serious. It was serious when you brought 2 men into our bed. Nothing came through the line for several seconds except a faint electronic hum. Then she said, so softly I almost missed it, you were there. For 47 seconds. She began crying. It was not the quiet crying of remorse. It was panicked, disorganized crying. The sound of someone discovering that all the doors she expected to use had locked at once. "Why didn't you say anything?" she demanded. "Because I wanted to know how much truth you were capable of offering without being forced." "We can explain." "Which one of you?" I asked. "You, Trevor, or Caleb?" It wasn't what it looked like. I actually laughed then, one short sound in the empty room. "Lindsay, there are very few situations less open to interpretation." She switched tactics immediately. "Nora put you up to this. She's vindictive, Ethan. Trevor told me she's always been unstable." Trevor also told Nora that I was unstable. Apparently, that word does a lot of work for him. Lindsay stopped crying for a moment. I could almost hear her recalculating. "Have you been sleeping with her?" she asked. Even then, that was what mattered to her. "No, don't lie to me. I'm not you." The words landed harder than if I had shouted. She said my name again, but I ended the call. By 10 o'clock, Trevor had tried to reach Nora 19 times. Caleb had appeared at Jasmine's hospital and been escorted out by security. Lindsay left her office without permission after a board member received notice that she had used a donor event as an alibi for one of the encounters. She was not fired that morning, but she was placed on administrative leave pending review of whether any nonprofit resources or contacts had been misused. At 11:15, she arrived at our house and found a process server waiting on the porch. Owen had photographed the moment from across the street. Lindsay accepted the divorce petition with one hand while holding her phone in the other, then sat down on the front step beneath the porch light I had restored for her birthday. Trevor arrived 20 minutes later, not to comfort her, but to accuse her of giving me access to his private information. Caleb joined the argument by phone. The three people who had laughed together in my bedroom were tearing each other apart before noon. Trevor claimed Lindsay had become reckless because she was obsessed with Caleb. Caleb said Trevor had promised to protect the group through his business connections. Lindsay accused both men of abandoning her the moment consequences appeared. The outdoor camera captured enough of the argument to confirm several dates and relationships they had not previously admitted. Nobody had told them the camera still recorded audio. That afternoon, Nora called me from her attorney's office. "Trevor says Lindsay was convenient," she said. His exact words were, "She was already unhappy and available. I never promised her a future." Caleb had apparently said something similar to Jasmine, insisting Lindsay pursued him and that the encounters meant nothing. I expected to feel satisfied knowing both men had dismissed her. Instead, I felt tired. Lindsay had sacrificed our marriage for people who considered her disposable, but that did not make me want her back. It merely exposed how cheaply she had valued what we built. When I returned home after 7, her car was blocking the driveway. She was sitting at the dining table surrounded by opened envelopes, her mascara streaked beneath swollen eyes. Rebecca was there too. Lindsay had called her expecting support, still unaware that my sister already knew everything. The moment I entered, Lindsay stood and rushed toward me. "Ethan, please," she said. "Tell them to stop. Tell Nora and Jasmine to stop sending things." I removed my work boots slowly and placed them beside the door where Trevor's and Caleb's shoes had been on the day my marriage ended. "They're not sending rumors," I said. "They're giving people evidence that concerns them. You're destroying lives." Rebecca rose from the table. "No, Lindsay. He's showing people what you all did with theirs." Lindsay turned toward her in disbelief. "You knew?" "I know enough. After everything I've done for your family, you're taking his side." Rebecca's face hardened. "He is my family, and you used that family as camouflage." Lindsay looked between us as though the final structure holding her upright had collapsed. Then she reached for me and said, "I love you. I know that sounds impossible right now, but I do. Trevor and Caleb manipulated me. I was lonely, and they kept pushing boundaries until I didn't know how to stop." I stepped away before her fingers touched my shirt. "You brought them into our home more than once. I made horrible choices. You made plans," I said. "You wrote that I was supposed to keep working and paying bills while you figured out what you wanted." Her mouth fell open. She had not known we possessed that message. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, disgust crossing her face. Lindsay sank back into the chair. For the first time, she stopped performing. "What happens now?" she asked. "You follow the temporary financial agreement. You communicate through Denise about the divorce. You arrange somewhere else to stay tonight. You're throwing me out?" The house is my separate property, and the court order gives me temporary exclusive use. Your attorney received a copy this morning. She looked around the dining room, at the restored shelves, the antique sideboard, and the framed photographs she had chosen. Where am I supposed to go? I thought about how many nights she had claimed to be with friends while coming back to this house, because she believed it would always remain available. Call Trevor, I said. Her expression twisted. He blocked me. There it was, the collapse distilled into 4 words. Caleb had blocked her too. Nora had frozen Trevor's access to their shared discretionary accounts under legal guidance. His brokerage partners had placed him on leave, and he no longer needed Lindsay as an escape because she had become evidence. Lindsay stared down at her divorce papers and whispered, I ruined everything. I did not contradict her. But the reckoning was only beginning, because before she left that night, Lindsay made one final attempt to regain control, and what she revealed forced Rebecca to choose between protecting an old family secret and finishing the truth we had started exposing. Lindsay waited until Rebecca stepped into the hallway to call her husband, then leaned across the dining table and said, Before you make me leave, there's something you should know about your sister. Her voice had changed. The crying stopped, her shoulders straightened, and for a second I saw the same cold calculation that had allowed her to serve me dinner hours after betraying me in our bedroom. Be very careful, I said. Rebecca knew about Trevor long before you did, she whispered. She helped me cover for him. Rebecca had just returned to the doorway. Her face went completely still. I looked from Lindsay to my sister and asked, Is that true? Rebecca did not answer immediately, and that hesitation gave Lindsay enough confidence to continue. She grabbed her phone and opened a chain of messages from almost a year earlier. They showed Lindsay asking Rebecca not to mention that she had been drinking with Trevor after a charity event. Rebecca had replied, You need to tell Ethan where you were before someone else does. In another message, Lindsay wrote, Nothing happened. He drove me home because I was embarrassed. Rebecca answered, Then stop putting yourself in situations you need me to hide. Lindsay held out the screen triumphantly. She knew. Rebecca walked into the room, read the messages, and shook her head. I knew you lied about where you spent one evening, she said. You told me Trevor drove you home because you were too drunk to call Ethan. I told you to confess that. I did not know you were having an affair. But you didn't tell him, Lindsay replied. Because you begged me not to turn one humiliating mistake into a marriage-ending accusation when you swore nothing physical happened. Rebecca faced me. That was wrong. I should have told you. I wanted to believe her because she was my friend, and because I thought I was protecting you from a pointless fight. I'm sorry. The admission hurt, but it was not the secret Lindsay believed it was. Rebecca had not assisted an affair. She had accepted one lie and carried it longer than she should have. Lindsay was trying to turn a moral failure of silence into equal responsibility for months of deliberate betrayal. Is there anything else? I asked Rebecca. Anything you saw, heard, or concealed? No, she said. And I'll give Denise my phone tonight. Every message. No deletions. Lindsay looked stunned. She had expected Rebecca to retreat in shame. Instead, my sister chose complete disclosure. You don't get to use my mistake as a shield, Rebecca told her. I should have warned Ethan, and I'll live with that. But you used my loyalty to make your lie safer. Then Rebecca did something that ended whatever friendship remained between them. She forwarded the entire conversation to Denise while Lindsay watched. There, she said. No more family secrets. I want you to notice the difference between guilt and accountability. Lindsay revealed other people's mistakes only when she needed leverage. Rebecca exposed her own mistake even though it made her look worse, because the truth mattered more than protecting her image. That was why I could eventually forgive my sister and why I could never trust my wife again. Lindsay packed 2 suitcases under Rebecca's supervision and moved into a short-term rental near Glen Allen. Before she left, she stood beneath our wedding photograph and asked, Was Nora worth all this? I almost answered defensively, but then I understood what she needed to believe. If Nora and I had crossed a physical line, Lindsay could recast our marriage as mutually corrupted. She could tell herself we were simply 2 selfish people who hurt each other. Nora did not end our marriage, I said. She helped me see what you had already done to it. You wanted her. For a while, I wanted you to think I did, I admitted. Every coffee, every public meeting, the scarf in my truck, you and Trevor were supposed to notice. We wanted you both uncertain and jealous while we collected the evidence. Her eyes widened as the slow seduction revealed itself as strategy. So you used her? No. We worked together. We agreed on the boundaries, and we kept them. And there was never anything between you? There was trust, I said. You should remember how valuable that is. She looked as though I had struck her, although I had not moved. Then she dragged her suitcases onto the porch, loaded them into her car, and drove away. The divorce took 9 months. It was less theatrical than people imagine. Most consequences arrived through conference rooms, sworn statements, financial disclosures, and long emails written in careful language. Lindsay initially demanded spousal support and half the increased value of the house. Her attorney withdrew the support claim after Denise presented evidence of adultery, including the original recording, Owen's photographs, synchronized messages, and Lindsay's own admissions. We negotiated over the marital portion of the mortgage equity, retirement contributions, furniture, and 2 vehicles. I did not walk away with every dollar, nor did I expect to. What I kept was the house, my business equipment, my retirement account's protected portion, and the ability to continue my life without financing hers. Lindsay received a settlement smaller than she had imagined and spent much of it on legal fees and rent. The nonprofit completed its internal investigation and terminated her after discovering she had falsely used work events as alibis and shared limited donor information with Trevor while helping him pursue business contacts. There was no grand announcement. Her employee access simply stopped working one Friday morning. Trevor's collapse traveled farther. His brokerage partners forced him out after the investigation showed that he had used a company-owned rental property and business expenses to support several affairs. Nora's divorce filings became known inside the small circle where Trevor had built his reputation, and 2 spouses threatened civil action related to his conduct. He sold his Mercedes, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment, and began working under another broker outside Richmond. Every attempt at a fresh introduction seemed to reach someone who already knew why his former partners had removed his name from the company website. Caleb lost his studio after multiple clients came forward and the landlord declined to renew his lease. Some women described consensual affairs. Others alleged that he had exploited confidential information and blurred professional boundaries during private training sessions. I was careful never to claim more than the evidence proved, but the verified facts alone were enough. Jasmine left him, took the dog, and moved closer to her hospital. Caleb tried offering online coaching under a different brand, but screenshots of his old messages followed him into the new business. The mass exposure worked not because we screamed the loudest, but because every person received the specific truth they had a right to know. Lindsay's relationship with both men ended before our first divorce hearing. Trevor blamed her for attracting my suspicion. Caleb blamed Trevor for documenting too much. Lindsay blamed them both for abandoning her, as if loyalty should have been expected inside an arrangement built entirely on disloyalty. She called me 3 months into the separation from an unfamiliar number after I blocked her personal phone. "I've started therapy," she said. "I understand now that I was chasing validation." "I hope therapy helps you," I replied. "It doesn't change the divorce. I don't want the house or money. I want another chance." "You asked for both through your attorney last week." She became quiet. "I'm scared, Ethan." There had been a time when those words would have activated every protective instinct in me. I would have driven across Richmond at midnight, repaired whatever was broken, and assured her that she was not alone. But I had finally learned that compassion did not require renewed access. "Call your therapist," I said, "or someone in your family. I cannot be that person for you anymore." She began crying and asked whether Nora was with me. "No," I answered. "Then why won't you try?" "Because leaving you does not mean I am choosing someone else. It means I am finally choosing myself." I ended the call and blocked the number. Nora and I remained allies throughout our divorces, but the closeness we had staged began creating real emotional confusion once the danger passed. We had shared information most people would never tell their closest friends. We knew the worst nights each other had endured. One evening, after meeting with our attorneys, we walked beside the James River while the city lights stretched across the water. Nora said, "Sometimes I can't tell whether I actually have feelings for you, or whether you're simply the person who understood when everything collapsed." I admitted I had wondered the same thing. There was an easy version of the story in which we kissed beneath the footbridge, turned revenge into romance, and called the symmetry fate. Real life demanded more honesty. If we start something now, I said, we might spend years wondering whether we chose each other or just grabbed the nearest person who knew the pain. Nora nodded, and although her eyes filled, she smiled. For an electrician, you occasionally say something intelligent. We hugged for a long time, then agreed not to turn our alliance into a relationship. That choice was not a rejection. It was respect. We stayed in occasional contact, but our lives gradually separated. Nora later accepted a communications position in Northern Virginia. Jasmine became one of her closest friends, and the two of them helped develop a confidential referral guide for employees dealing with harassment, coercion, or intimate partner betrayal. Rebecca and I repaired our relationship more slowly. She apologized without excuses and began calling every Sunday, not to monitor me, but to make sure silence never grew between us again. I visited her family in Charlottesville, taught my nephew how to replace a damaged light switch safely, and eventually told her I forgave her. I did not pretend her silence had been harmless, but forgiveness became possible because she never again tried to minimize it. She had chosen my side when doing so cost her a friendship and forced her to confront her own failure. That mattered. 6 months after the divorce became final, I removed the wedding photograph from the hallway. I had left it there throughout the legal process because taking it down initially felt like admitting defeat. One Saturday morning, I climbed a small ladder, lifted the frame from its hook, and noticed the rectangle of clean paint it had protected for years. The surrounding wall had faded slightly in the sunlight. I patched the hole, repainted the entire section, and installed a simple black and white photograph of the Richmond skyline that I had taken myself from Libby Hill. That small repair affected me more than signing the divorce decree. The house no longer felt like a crime scene or a monument to our marriage. It became mine again. I converted the guest room where I had secretly slept into an office and finally started the electrical contracting company I had postponed for years. I named it Walker Current Solutions, bought a used service van, and hired Luis as my first full-time employee after his previous company downsized. Within a year, we had 4 electricians, 2 apprentices, and maintenance contracts with 3 apartment complexes and a medical office network that had no connection to Nora. I did not become rich overnight. I dealt with late invoices, emergency calls, payroll anxiety, and a van transmission that failed during our busiest month. But every problem belonged to a life I had consciously chosen. That made even the stressful days feel clean. I also started doing something that would have sounded ridiculous to the old version of me. I took a beginner's rowing class on the James River. I was terrible during the first month. My timing was off, my shoulders ached, and a retired schoolteacher 20 years older than me moved twice as fast. Still, every Saturday morning I returned. There was peace in learning something I could not fix immediately with tools. It taught me patience without passivity, the difference I had failed to understand during my marriage. Nearly 2 years after the day I came home early, I saw Lindsay at a grocery store in Midlothian. She wore a store uniform and was arranging promotional signs near the entrance. Her hair was shorter, and the polished confidence she once carried seemed muted. She noticed me beside the produce section and froze. For a second, I expected anger, pleading, or another explanation. Instead, she approached and said, "I heard your company is doing well." "It is," I replied. "Congratulations." "Thank you." She glanced at my empty cart and asked, "Are you seeing anyone?" "No." A strange hope appeared in her expression, so I added, "I'm happy, Lindsay." She understood. "Right," she said. "Of course." She told me she had moved into a smaller apartment and was still in therapy. She no longer spoke to Trevor or Caleb. I wished her well, and I meant it, but I felt no pull toward her, no desire to punish, rescue, impress, or reclaim. She had become someone I once knew. I walked away carrying a bag of coffee and felt lighter than I had after any legal victory. Indifference was the closure revenge could never manufacture. If you had told me on that first afternoon that I would someday feel grateful for parts of what happened, I would have thought you were cruel. I was not grateful for the betrayal. I was grateful that I eventually refused to let it define the rest of my life. Catching Lindsay destroyed my understanding of the past, but rebuilding alone gave me ownership of the future. I no longer measured my value by whether someone remained faithful to me. I measured it by the boundaries I enforced, the work I was proud of, the family relationships I tended honestly, and the peace I could maintain when nobody else was in the room. I learned 5 things from what happened. 1. When I saw those 2 pairs of shoes, restraint protected everything anger could have destroyed. Recording the truth, leaving the house, and calling an attorney gave me choices that violence would have taken away. 2. Evidence should reach the people entitled to it, not become entertainment for strangers. Sending verified, individual packets protected the other spouses and vulnerable clients, while making it much harder for Trevor and Caleb to dismiss the exposure as gossip. 3. Jealousy revealed what Lindsay's apologies initially concealed. She did not rediscover love when Nora's scarf appeared in my truck. She panicked because she felt control slipping away. Real remorse accepts consequences. Possessiveness merely fears replacement. 4. Accountability and manipulation can look similar until someone risks their own reputation. Rebecca admitted her silence, surrendered her messages, and stopped protecting herself. Lindsay revealed that silence only to redirect blame. That difference allowed one relationship to heal and ended the other permanently. 5. Winning the divorce was not the same as healing. The legal outcome secured my house and finances, but repainting the hallway, starting my company, learning to row, and becoming comfortable alone were the things that actually rebuilt me. Now I want to ask what you would have done at the moment I reached that partly open bedroom door. Comment 1 if you think quietly collecting evidence and informing every affected person was the right response. Comment 2 if you would have confronted all 3 of them immediately, or comment 3 if you believe the exposure should have remained limited to the divorce. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I'm always amazed by how far stories about trust and survival can travel. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe for more stories about people who found their strength after everything familiar fell apart. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional patterns, fully rewritten in Richmond to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.